So welcome to Bold Thinking, entrepreneurial stories honestly told. In a world full of chaos, this is a podcast about the people making positive change in the world, using bold thinking to transform businesses and themselves. And, we need a bit of that at the moment. So today I'm speaking to Bastian Lindberg, who's co-founder of a tribe called Humans, a collective of free-ranging humans with individual capabilities who believe and what works better for people works better for business. So A Tribe Called Human is only a few months old, and Bastian has a fascinating background in the world of brands, including leading human-centered marketing at Deutsche Bank and brand and communications at Telefonica Germany. So welcome, Bastian. Lovely to meet you. Thank you for joining us today.
Great being here. Thanks.
So I just want to ask, it'd be great to ask you a few questions and get your thoughts and ideas. Fascinated by, your experience in the world. So really want to kick off with, what's been your boldest business idea to date?
Well, probably pretty much the one that you just introduced, because this is like really my first, the first own business or kind of idea that I'm trying to build. Before that, I've always been employed, by companies and agencies. So that's really the boldest idea so far that we're having. And it is that I believe that the future of business is human, because what works better for people works better for business. So that's the kind of fundamental belief at the heart of it, which was just born out of, 15 years corporate experiences that I've had.
So is there any sort of values or superpowers that you believe that, A Tribe Called Human stands for?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think we're trying to be pretty much an antidote to just the traditional, corporate business model, which is pretty much directed by policies and processes and so on. And we really try to be ourselves a human first organization, which is also what we're trying to help businesses to become. Having said that, that's a kind of always beta state for us, because we don't know exactly what that is and how that works, but we're exploring it every day. And I think one of the core, belief for us is that being a human first organization is really about utilizing our human superpowers, which we actually have and which we kind of lost on the way, I think, when we started to become those big corporate organizations. And those three things are empathy, reason, and creativity. And those are the kind of human capabilities that we all bring to this world. And I think as businesses, as organizations, we just need to become better at unlocking them again. And I could talk a bit more about each one of them.
I suppose, what does that mean for a brand's customers? Empathy, reason, and creativity. What does that mean for customers? Do you think how is that going to help people more?
Yeah. So the core thing is expressed also in that core idea. What works better for people. So I think if businesses, if brands start shifting from making people want things to making things that people actually want, we as consumers will be in a much better place, because we'll actually get products and services that create real value in our lives, that really help us to, achieve what we're trying to do. And on the other hand, also will be better aligned with our values. They will, businesses will strive to create something beyond profit, which actually really has kind of value in this world. So I think that's really the fundamental benefit for us as consumers, is that we can just expect things that are much more relevant, and that also have better experiences using them. I think there's some shocking numbers around how actually unsatisfied consumers generally are with experiences that brands provide.
So, you work with some of the, world's biggest sort of banking and telecommunication companies. What did you take from this experience that you can bring into your new business?
A lot. I think, without those experiences, I wouldn't have come to the point to make that decision. And I think the two sectors are very different, but there are some similarities. And the one is, I think that the bigger organizations get, I think they more become focused on themselves rather than actually the people they do business for. I think that's in a way maybe a natural, because I've seen it everywhere. I've also seen it on the agencies that I've worked with, is that actually I think it was the Ogilvy's here who once said that if they lost every client today, it would take them a year to realize, so because everybody's just so busy with their own processes and just kind of managing the day-to-day. And I think that shift of attention really has resulted in just a lot of kind of poorly functioning services and mediocrity, I think also. And I think that it's also led to just this obsession with profit and with just kind of building value for the company and not really for the people they're doing the business for, so the consumers, but also the people, I think, that work for the organization. I think they're a very fundamental part in the equation. And I think even them, they've been kind of often taken out of the picture and not really seen as a as a potential. I mean, we talk about human resources. I really don't like that term, because it sounds like people are just something that we manage. And
battery.
Yeah, like a battery, exactly. Yeah. Whereas I think that is ultimately the potential of an organization. Yeah.
I can absolutely see your process, and I think in the world of tomorrow, the post-COVID world, I just feel that people feel like they're a lot more, vulnerable, to the shift and the change, and it becomes a lot more sort of, difficult for people to adjust and everything like that. Everybody wants us to, everybody wants things to stay the same, and they really struggle to change. So I suppose, what do you feel like you've learned along the way? Do you feel like, you've grasped from, these big businesses that now you're taking into, the human element?
Yeah, I mean, the vulnerability is a key thing, I think, and it's also very related to that superpower of empathy. I think if you're really empathetic, then you are generally able to just put yourself in other people's position, but that also means that you are willing to accept that yourself, you're kind of not perfect, and you're opening up and you can share it. And I think that is a huge driver for productivity and creativity in organizations, actually, kind of really dealing more openly with also those tensions. And I think if you look at it like that, you'll ultimately start doing things that are more designed from kind of an outside-in perspective rather than an inside-out. And I think it's also related to this whole idea of becoming a learn-it-all organization instead of being a know-it-all organization. I think it's something that, if you read about the transformation of Microsoft and so on, that I find quite amazing how they're looking at that, I think our traditional management mantra is like, you have to be the kind of smartest and strongest person in the room. But actually, if that is the case, then you will start designing a culture where people will not really speak up, where the best ideas will not be shared, where people are holding back. And I think over the long term, that just accumulates in an organization standing still because it's not evolving anymore. And, I think vulnerability is a very key component of that. And I think only if also we as leaders start modeling that behavior more, we'll invite others to actually really share and express their thoughts and their feelings and all that stuff. And I think that is very fundamental if we want to be a business that is able to respond quickly to stuff that's happening around us, look at this crisis, and I think we will see that those companies will succeed. I think that will be very open and receptive to just ideas and thoughts that come from everywhere, whether it's customers or your employees. But I think the times where we can assume that we know it all, they're gone because we don't know what's coming ahead.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's a lot of, what would you say is then the best bit of advice that you've ever been given?
I can remember that very clearly. It was a couple of years ago when I worked with a personal coach, just kind of transitioning into my new role at Deutsche Bank. And one of the things that he really made me understand is that idea of really leading by questions. So kind of not going into this new organization and going into the new job assuming that I have to know all the answers, and immediately tell people what I think we should be doing, but actually going there and really kind of with a curious and inquisitive mindset, and asking a lot of questions, really understanding the organization and the people. And that actually wasn't really easy, because I had quite a few moments where I went into a meeting and it was maybe with somebody who's more senior than me, and you could just feel their expectation that you're just going to tell them now what you think we should be doing. And that was like in the second week of my of being there, so that's totally unrealistic. But on the other hand, that's the kind of pressure you feel. And I actually think it's quite we need to learn that, to really focus more on asking questions and not knowing the answers or making up the answers because we feel we need to give one. And I think that way we can also lead teams and employees to a point where they will start looking for the answers. And I think if you accumulate that over the whole population of a big organization, you have such a creative potential, and great ideas will just kind of start to bubble up. And I think then the job of management is to set the frameworks to evaluate those ideas and pick the best ideas, but not to kind of tell everyone what to do and what the best thing to go forward is.
No, I love that. It's a bit like catching butterflies, isn't it? I mean, how have you done that in the past? How have you sort of, if there's lots of people, lots of great ideas, how have you sort of like captured those great ideas? Because I think you're right. At the moment, the world we're in, it's all about, okay, we can learn a bit from the past and the data that's been given. But I think a lot of it's going to be thinking fast on our feet. It's going to be about new ideation, new thinking, new ways of working. How do you see that being captured in big organizations and within what you're doing now?
Yeah. I mean, I think we like to talk about the second superpower, which is reason, which sounds strange. And a lot of people say, well, but businesses are very rational, and I think actually quite rarely they really are, because if they would be like really rational, they would do exactly what you said. They'd be relying heavily on data and kind of insight and true information. But I've experienced it so many times in meetings that people would even doubt or question the stats, that you would put in front of them and say, well, yeah, but I think it's different and so on, although the data clearly shows that. And I think overcoming those biases, the confirmation bias or this kind of not invented here syndrome and all those kind of things, I think needs better frameworks in terms of how we debate and decide in organizations. And I think that it's really human in a way to have those biases, but putting egos aside and really making sure that the best ideas succeed, I think is one of the key differences of very successful organizations to maybe more mediocre organizations. And I think that's hard. I don't have the kind of recipe to do that, but I think what it needs more is a collaborative mindset in an organization, and also probably related to the kind of human-centered idea to have a mindset where, and I think that like Steve Jobs said that, it's about making the right thing. It's not about being right. And I think really managing and facilitating kind of a decision-making process that this can happen, I think for me is the key. Now, how exactly you do that, I think that's going to be very different in every organization, and what the operating system, so to say, is. But I think it's got a lot to do with just leaving the ego outside of the room, in a way, because I think that gets in the way of better decision-making mostly.
Have you got any specific examples of that from Deutsche Bank? I mean, because obviously, in your very corporate experience, an amazing experience you've had, which is very sort of KPI driven and performance, and you get a role, you get a job description, you get, performance targets, everything. How does that work? Because that's very much about the you rather than the we collective, because you're judged by that rather than, how does that work?
Yeah. Different approaches, the one is, I think, bring the voice of the customer into the process, and like if you're coming up with new ideas, test them, get feedback, put that feedback in front of the people who make the decisions, and let them experience kind of how consumers are responding to those ideas. I think that generally already gives a better idea of what the reality is and so on. So that's one very important part. So we started to develop kind of a co-creation lab where we would regularly kind of co-develop, but at least also just test prototypes and ideas with customers. I think that's one important way you could do that. The other one, I think, is also in terms of how you're setting up projects internally. And I think this idea of collaboration can't start when it's about making decisions. This needs to start when, it's about exploring potentials, when it's about coming up with ideas and really bringing together diverse teams where they start working on solutions right from the start across different departments and silos is fundamental, because then you can also ensure that you have the buy-in from different parts of the organization along the way. And I think that ultimately helps to align people around kind of, shared objectives. And I think that's the kind of last point. I think this whole idea around, call it purpose, call it kind of shared vision, but just really having this alignment around a big idea that is also bigger than just making money and profit. It's something that really helps, because if people are buying into that and if everyone wants to achieve that, then I think you have ultimately a better foundation for creating alignment and then making the right decision, rather than just kind of people looking where their individual benefits lie.
No, I love that. I think having a purpose as an organisation is really massive, and not only having it, but actually living it and sort of really sort of feeling it and having it ingrained. So if you look forward in a year's time at your life, where do you see yourself being, and what does success look like for you, and how optimistic are you that you're going to get to that point?
Starting maybe from, I'm very optimistic because I love what I'm doing. I think it's, on the one hand important, but on the other hand, it's also just a much more fun way to work. So I don't want to go back. And we're not in this to necessarily be massively commercially successful very quickly. As long as we kind of can pay the rent from that and so on. It's really something that we believe in as a kind of bigger purpose. And success for me really looks like that in a year from now, I want to be able to say that we've touched a few organizations, and helped them to start making small changes, because it's not going to be this one quick fix, and changing the mindset and the operating system of an organization is going to be a very long transformation journey. And I see ourselves as kind of contributing to that journey, rather than us bringing the one solution. And I also, second part of that is I just want to have increased the network of collaborators. So the whole idea of a tribe obviously is we're not a traditional agency or consultancy, so we don't strive to have a lot of employees. We actually want to be a big network of independent people who collaborate, but also collaborating with other interesting companies who are, sharing similar visions and purpose. It's a bit like, climate change or so. The more people who will kind of get engaged in a mission to change something about it, I think the better it will be. So that's kind of how I see it for ourselves. So those are the two things. And just looking at myself a year from now, I probably want to have had a lot of conversations like this one with you, and just feel that in at least a small part, I've kind of made my contribution to a bigger change that's happening around a more kind of human-centered business world and economy.
So do you think the world needs some bold thinking at the moment?
Absolutely. I think always, the thing with creativity is that I think it's often perceived as a risk in many businesses, it comes with this with this assumed loss in a way, that if we buy into something that we don't know yet what exactly it's going to bring, I think that puts a lot of people off. So I think for great ideas to thrive, there always needs to be some kind of courage and boldness. And especially since now I think everything that's coming ahead is so unknown. And, you need a lot of people who dare to go into the unknown and just explore things and also be able to screw up and fail and have that vulnerability again, that some things might not work, and learn from that, boldness is going to be very key.
It's interesting. I worked with a big bank last year, and they'd got a survey. I think it was someone like Accenture or something. And the MD from the bank was talking to me and said, this time 4 years ago, these are the 12 things that we look for in our candidates. And, where do you think creativity ranked? It was literally not on the list. And he said we had this list through recently, and creativity ranked as number 3 in the traits they were looking for out of new sort of people in their organisation. And I just clapped my hands with joy.
Yeah.
Because I think we've got to reimagine the world creatives have, haven't we, to a degree, and redefine and get things. And I don't just mean creative as in creative ideation. I mean creative in terms of thinkers, business thinkers like you, an entrepreneur that wants to create a movement. I think that's really important.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that you say that. I mean, I totally believe in that as well. I'm definitely consider myself a kind of evangelist for creativity in organization. But the interesting thing is that I've heard it so many times that, managers say, of course, like we want more creativity and we want more ideas and please everybody, share ideas, and we're very open to that and so on. And they might have even some interesting, incentives for that. But for me, what I realized is that the really fundamental thing about being a more creative organization is not hiring creative people, because you can make a lot of creative people become very uncreative or just scare them away very quickly if you don't create the conditions for creativity to really thrive. And I think that comes back to also what you mentioned early on, creating this psychological safety in an organization and this openness. I think to a lot of leaders, a new idea in the first moment is almost a bit like an offense, because it didn't come from them. It kind of says, you hadn't had the right idea before and so on. And of course it's nonsense, but I think that's how quite a lot of people feel about it. And I think this is what we need to change. So I encourage all those organizations, yes, hire more creative people, but you also need to create the conditions for creativity to really thrive and occur, and also the courage then, as you said earlier on, to follow up with those ideas, and dare to take some bets.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I've had it a few times happen in my life, and I sort of describe it as being, I describe myself as a creative and a creative thinker. And a few instances in life, I felt like I've been a bit of a bird that's been put in a cage, because of the environment that I've been wrapped in. And when I know I'm a bird in a cage, I pretty much know that journey's ended. Yeah. And I think feels like you're quite similar. Look, that was brilliant. Thanks so much, Bastian. I absolutely love the way you think and your thought process and the idea for this movement. So thank you for your time today. And so thank you for listening to Bold Thinking, which is all about entrepreneurial stories honestly told. So join us next time to hear from more people making positive change in the world. Thank you, Bastian. I love that. It was really good, really inspiring.
Enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you.